I consider myself very patriotic. I love being American. I really do. And I travel internationally and it's wonderful, but I love being American. And there are things about me that are unapologetically and perhaps problematically American. I love this country for so many reasons. I think my story and evolution is only possible in this country. So I'm a very patriotic place that this country was founded in racism and misogyny and all these things. And it doesn't mean I don't love my country. It's just like, that's the truth.
Oh my God, Laverne bloody Cox. Welcome to my way.
Bloody Cox.
Yeah.
It's never been referred to that way before, Laverne Bloody Cox.
I'm so happy you're here. I have longed to have you on this podcast, but you are the busiest woman on the fucking planet. And so it is a joy to have you here now. And I'm glad that I'm a more experienced interviewer by the time you got here. I've been a fan of yours for a really long time and always nervously approached you at events and been so excited to find another tall woman in the room. Always very excited.
Yes, I'm always excited about that too.
Hunch my shoulders and come down to whoever I'm being photographed with. But
we need not shrink ourselves in each other's presence.
But you have a very charismatic and magical presence when you're in a room, and I'm curious about there's this feeling that I get from you, and I know that it's probably part real and potentially part facade, but it's like an immovability in you. You are so fucking firmly in your heels, in your shoes, your stilettos are deep in the ground, and you are so fundamentally yourself, and you seem so unbelievably confident. But over time, through reading more of your interviews and reading more about everything that you've put out into the world, I learned that facade doesn't match, as with many people, your internal monologue. And so that's one of many things that I would like to talk about with you, is your journey to the self-love of being the woman that someone else goes, fuck me, they're strong and confident in a room. I'd love to find out how you got there. So do you mind talking to me about your relationship with mental health, especially when you were young? Let's just start there.
Well, I have to comment on that whole strong, immovable thing, because I think it's both and. I think most of my life, I've always, without trying, people have noticed me, and people have noticed me when I walk into a room. And when I was a child, when I was young, that was a problem because I was assigned male at birth, and I was noticed because I was very femme, and I've always had this presence and been who I am. And I understand that now as a light that has always been inside of me, but when I was a kid, it was a light that my teachers wanted to dim, the people at church wanted to dim, the other children wanted to beat up and punish. And so it's something that I started to dim, but it's always been there. And so much of my mental health journey, which is also a spiritual journey, is letting go of the bully that I internalized. I mean, when I think about my mental health journey, I think so much of it is about I internalized the voices of the bullies. So I would bully myself before the other kids did. Just sort of, it was the self-policing of my gender, self-policing of my behavior. But the wonderful thing about me is that even when I was trying to be more masculine, it sounds so hilarious now, even when I was trying to sort of police all the things that were natural to me and dim this light, that there was just something inside me that it had to come out. And it was just not really ever, it was very difficult for me not to be myself. I had to I remember in high school, I went to the Alabama School of Fine Arts in Birmingham. I'm from Mobile, Alabama, the deep South. And I went to a boarding school at the Alabama School of Fine Arts. And I had started dressing myself in junior high, going to, Salvation Army thrift stores and whatever, and getting things for 99 cents and, and starting to develop my fashion and style. But when I was away from my mother at the Alabama School of Fine Arts at an art school, I really kind of went for it and started, wearing skirts, not dresses. I internalized a lot of transphobia. I had a moment in third grade when my third grade teacher called my mother on the phone and said, your son is going to end up in New Orleans wearing a dress if we don't get him into therapy right away. I know I've told this story a zillion times, but it's so formative for me. And it was like, I went to this kind of reparative therapy for a while. And so the idea of ending up in New Orleans wearing a dress was terrifying to me. But I needed to express my femininity. So the compromise for me were skirts and culottes and wide leg bell bottoms in high school. And so I was sort of started existing in this gender non-conforming space. And that was a compromise for me because I think because I've always been an artist and I've always been a creative person, I needed to express myself in how I dressed. And so even though I was trying to suppress parts of myself, there was a part of me that just, it didn't feel right. And so I had to find ways to be who I was. And so that's always been in me. And so over the years, it's just been letting go of those voices. I think about the interview we did with on my show. If we're being honest, you talked about all sort of negative messages you internalized, and I think we all do. And so much of the journey, it's been about letting go of those voices, letting go of that self-bully, and in letting go of who I think I'm supposed to be to embrace who I really am.
I mean, it was fucking intense, like in you, that like self-policing and that self-shame, even as such a young kid. I mean, I remember reading about, and I hope you feel comfortable talking about this, but you know, suicidal tendencies even as young
Oh
as
yeah.
11, for
Oh yeah.
realizing that you were falling in love with a boy, you know, at school, and at the time you
Yeah.
were still identified as your gender being a boy as well, and so
Yeah.
all of the shame
Yeah.
coming from that, and then also being from within the Black community, and then it sounds like you were within a religious community,
All that.
and then in
Yes.
the South,
Mm-hmm.
just that's the trifecta of hell in a young child who doesn't know that one day they might have a chance to be
Mm.
free.
Yeah. It was hell in some ways. And what it's been so beautiful about the trauma resilience therapy that I'm doing is that it's rooted in both, and that yes, I internalized lots of transphobia and homophobia. I had a tremendous amount of shame about being attracted to boys, about being as feminine as I was. But that religious tradition, even though I'm not a religious person now, the spirituality of the AME church I grew up in, the spiritual tradition of Black people in America is something, even though I find religion oppressive and problematic, the spiritual piece and the ways in which Black people have found through spirituality to get through, I find myself coming back to that as like the only thing that makes sense to me on a spiritual level. So yes, the suicide piece is so, part of me, I have had moments of regretting talking about that publicly because I've seen headlines that feel like it minimizes it. I might cry today. It's okay. I'm very open emotionally lately, but it was to minimize that, feel like to have a headline that sort of minimizes this period in my life that was so deeply painful. It's hard, but that is what you do as a public person, and sharing that has I know given other people space to share their stories around not wanting to be on the planet anymore. And what is sad to me is that like 11 years old was not the last time I mean, that was the only real suicide attempt I had. And then later on, I think I was slowly trying to kill myself through, various kinds of self-abuse and self-flagellation. The suicidal tendencies did not stop then. The suicidal thoughts, I should say, did not stop when I was 11. And so much of it was about, I remember being in early in transition, maybe a couple of years. So it would have been the early 2000s into medical transition, and constantly being misgendered on the street, and just having been, I was by this time I was in my late 20s, and I just been bullied my whole life. Um, the street has always been, public space has always been a place where I've been harassed. And I was just so tired and so exhausted, like literally my whole life. And I think I had a fantasy that when I medically transitioned and like I would be read more as female on the street, that the harassment would stop. But alas, I'm a woman. So street harassment doesn't stop as a woman. And I think you know, so much of the street harassment I experienced in early in my transition, now I understand was because mostly men were attracted to me and then would realize I was trans. And so it would start with catcalling that would turn into this transphobia when once they realized I was trans, this sort of intersection of misogyny and transphobia, trans misogyny. And so it's just, I was just so tired and so exhausted. I'm so glad that I'm so glad I didn't kill myself. I'm so glad that I'm still here and that I have a story to tell. And it's been a struggle. And I think the struggle has been letting go of those voices. The struggle has been just walking out of my house, you know, in New York City as a trans woman and trying to get from point A to point B alive and or not kicked or beaten. And feeling like I have a right to be here. And the thing that really has consistently gotten me through is the spiritual grounding of my childhood and also art, being an artist, being a creative person, pursuing that and having that be the center of my life, even when I didn't believe in myself, even when I was in such distress that I didn't want to live anymore. I loved acting. I loved music and dancing and going to a concert, listening to music, going to a play. Like these things have been literally life sustaining for me. And so it's just so wonderful to get to be an artist and to be alive at 50 years old, having gone through all of this and getting to testify that it is possible to struggle, to go through all sorts of self doubt, self policing, self bullying, you know, bullying from the outside, physical assault, sexual assault, and heal. And I'm not just alive. I am a more evolved version of myself. I'm not just here um damaged and walking around in my trauma. I am here healing. I wouldn't say I'm healed, but I am here more aware with more tools and more resilience. You know, you build trauma resilience, you build shame resilience, and I'm here more resilient. And that is, I can't even believe that that is possible, honestly, from where I started. Hmm.
It's been a fuck of a journey. It's been a fuck of a journey, and you
Yeah.
speak about it with so much thoughtfulness and so much self investigation. What age did that self investigation start? Because I can imagine, especially from the sounds of things, that it was a fucking rocky road. And were you in New York this whole time? Have you always been in New York?
I no. So when I graduated from the Alabama School of Fine Arts in 1991, I went to the Houston Ballet Academy. I was a dance major at the Alabama School of Fine Arts. Went to the Houston Ballet Academy for the summer, and then I went to Indiana University for 2 years, and then I moved to New York in 1993, and
And
have
what
lived.
time? Sorry, go on. And I
No,
was
no,
wondering, like, as in, like, so when you had, you know, demonstrably transitioned externally, like, etc., like, where were you then?
that was all in New York. So I
Mm.
wasn't able, oh my God, there was no way I could have even accepted. When I moved to New York, I was just in denial about being trans. Like I really was. But by the time I moved to New York, I was kind of very gender nonconforming, had a shaved head. I wore makeup every day and false eyelashes to ballet class. And I had beautiful, like wide leg bell bottoms and platform shoes that I wore all the time. And we would use the term probably gender nonconforming now to sort of denote how, or gender fluid, denote the way my gender was expressing itself when I moved to New York in 1993. It wasn't until 1990, oh gosh, 1998, yeah, 1998 that I started medically transitioning, where I went to the doctor and started hormones and started all of that process. So it was, I guess, 1993 to 1998. That's 5 years in New York and evolving to being more and more femme, though, embracing more of my femininity and just letting go. And really, it was meeting transgender women in the club scene. And I had all these ideas about who trans people were based on what I seen in the media. And then I was at,
What did you think they were?
I thought they were, oh, this is so sad, but I thought they were degenerate, criminals, homeless, uneducated, um, just
Unloved.
horrible people, like just horrible, awful people. And I was a church going straight A student who was very ambitious, and I didn't associate any of that with being trans, which is really sad to me when I think about that. And then I meet these women who are really smart and beautiful and ambitious and like me. And I saw myself in them. And there was a particular woman who I've talked a lot about named Tina Sparkles. I don't know where and Tina moved to somewhere in Europe, and it's sort of, she back in the day, the idea is you transition and then, you move away somewhere and you never tell anyone that you're trans. That was sort of the protocol, according to Dr. Harry Benjamin, up until recently. And so I met Tina at Webster Hall, right when I moved to New York in '93, and she was a drag queen at the time and had not medically transitioned. And over the next several years of knowing Tina, I saw her transition and become this beautiful woman, and just had this beautiful soul and spirit, and she was just incredible. And I just remember saying to myself, if Tina can do this, what can I do? And I met Candace Kane, and I met this woman named Paris, who was this incredible club kid and icon who was just so beautiful and a fashion designer. And she later became a modeling agent, and it just these amazing women who I saw myself in. And then those women gave me the courage to go to Dr. Rish's office in 1998 for my first hormone shot in the beginning of my medical transition. And this, as difficult as those next several years were, transitioning, having accepted my womanhood, the world not reflecting that womanhood back to me the way that I had hoped, I just remember being so relieved to be like, okay, this is who I am. And just being in this place of acceptance, even though the world was cruel, very, very cruel to me. I was like, it was just so much better being in acceptance of who I was and not being in denial, even if the world was as mean as they were. I was like, oh my God, I just felt freer, Does that
But
make sense?
it speaks to really the power that we underestimate of at least accepting yourself, of at least being on your own side, which I know is something that you've still, struggled with beyond that moment. But when
Oh,
you
yeah.
stop gaslighting yourself, when you stop imprisoning yourself just because the world told you you're supposed to, the difference that can make really does like weaken the sound. I'm not diminishing the experience of that external like ostracization or bigotry that you would have faced, but it is extraordinary, the power. And that's
Mm-hmm.
why it is so important. It's why people like you and the message that you put out now, and
Mm-hmm.
the hashtag of trans is beautiful, and the
Mm-hmm.
stunning Beyonce-esque videos that you've been putting out for years with your hair. How does your hair blow like that in the Instagram videos? Is someone
There's
holding a
there's a
fucking...
fan. I literally have a
Oh, it's a
fan
fan.
right behind this. Girl, there's a fan right behind this mirror.
I was imagining your boyfriend holding a hairdryer or something, like
Most of those I
strategically.
shoot myself, and we have a fan. This is my glam, area here in New York, and I have a glam room in LA, and I have a fan, girl, just right there. And when I'm ready, I mostly shoot those videos all by myself with the tripod, my phone on a tripod, and we just turn on the fan and
Yeah.
feel crazy in love. And
But those videos are a call to arms, right, for other trans people and for non-trans people, to for cis people to recognize trans as beautiful. And it's kind of like it feels to me like a message you're not just saying to everyone else, but you're very much so saying to yourself, you're saying to your
oh
younger
yeah,
self, you're saying to the woman that you are now. But if
I'm
we could, the reason that the society tries to take women in particular, I would say, and gender non-conforming people as well, but especially women, there's an attack on us because we are 80% of the consumer market, right? The reason they try so hard to destabilize our inner monologue is because they know that if we can master the power of being on our own side, then it will weaken all of the other voices that beat us into submission. And
yeah,
so for you to even just temporarily really find that, where you were like, right, well, I'm taking
yeah,
these fucking injections for me, and I'm making these moves, and I'm telling these doctors who I really am, and I'm coming out to my friends, and I'm coming out to the world, I'm coming out to myself. I'm
yeah.
doing what my 11-year-old self needed the most. I'm doing it.
Mm-hmm.
I've gotten to myself to a place of safety and financial security where I can actually take these fucking steps. Good for me.
Yeah.
Saved, it must have saved your life.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. But what's interesting is that coming out is not even really the word. I remember telling my brother, my twin brother, that I was medically transitioning, and he was living in San Francisco at the time, and knew many trans people and had dated trans people, and he was like, "Oh, you're doing the medical thing, okay?" And it wasn't, and and people were like, oh, that makes sense. It was, no one was really surprised. It was people who knew me were like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. So it wasn't like this, because the transition wasn't like I was this I was this gender nonconforming person. So it wasn't coming
It
out.
wasn't like a jock transitioning. Yeah.
No, not at
Yeah.
all. That's the media story, right? That's the media story that's been told for 60 plus years, but that really wasn't my reality. And I have to say that the trans is beautiful hashtag came out of once I started medically transitioning and was in the world and accepting my womanhood, and the world was not reflecting that back to me. There was a different kind of policing that started. Oh, my hands are too big. Oh, my voice is too deep. Oh, my shoulders are too wide. I'm too tall. And so then it was like this new thing. It's like I accepted being trans. This is awesome, but then I'm not woman enough. And Trans is Beautiful came out about, it was 2015. I remember being 2015, and I was talking about that journey of accepting that, like, I'm not beautiful despite my big hands, my big feet, my deep voice, my height, but I'm beautiful because of those things. I could look at other trans women who were not, we use this language, cis assumed, or passing is the old language that's deeply problematic, but I could see the beauty in trans women, other trans women who were noticeably trans. I could look at them and be like, she's noticeably trans, but she is a beautiful woman. I could see that in other trans women, but I couldn't see it in myself. And I was like, what is going on? I was comparing myself. I was saying I wasn't woman enough. And so Trans is Beautiful started, I was doing a lecture somewhere, and I was like, because we also came out of reading Bell Hooks, and Bell Hooks talking about loving Blackness as political resistance. And I remember reading that essay probably, in the early 90s, and saying, like, trans people need a movement up. There was a Black is Beautiful movement that started in the late 1960s that was about moving away from white supremacist beauty standards to empower the things about Blackness that are beautiful. And I was like, trans people need this, and I was doing this lecture, and I was like, we should start a hashtag Trans is Beautiful, just kind of like off the cuff. And people started, tweeted and Instagram Trans is Beautiful that night. I encouraged everyone to do it. And then we kind of kept doing it. And now millions of people all over the world have shared on social media hashtag Trans is Beautiful. And it is a reminder for me. I'll hear my voice. I'm in media and on a film I've done, or on an interview, and I'm like, oh, Laverne, your voice is so deep. And I'm like, Trans is beautiful. I literally say it to myself. I say it to myself because it's like, I unfortunately, I went through a puberty that released a lot of testosterone into my body. And so my voice, you know, got really low. And I think about the opportunity that so many young trans people have to avoid that, right? There's this big conversation that, trans people are being scapegoated by talking about, gender affirming care for trans youth. And people are debating it, and I see people who don't really know what they're talking about debating it, and should it be allowed and should it not be allowed. And I'm just like, everything I can come up with is just, it's none of your business. It's none of your business. If you're
Mm-hmm.
not the parent of that child, if you're not a doctor, why is society getting involved
The same
in the
fucking
health
society.
care
Yeah.
decisions of, even if they're children, right? Like, there are people who know, there are doctors, there are parents, and in the United States, in every aspect, right? That, the same people who are like, parents should be in control of what our kids, learn in school and how we raise our children. But like, if parents are supportive of their trans children, then parents do not get the right in Texas, right? The governor of Texas saying, if you support your transgender child, this is child abuse, we may take your children away. That is a policy now in the state of Texas. Gender affirming care for trans youth has been banned in the state of Florida. And they're like, not allowing Medicaid to cover trans gender affirming care for trans adults in the state of Florida. So this is really what it's about. It's about making it not exist. And it's so, the arguments are being had in such bad faith, and it's so angering to me. And I don't talk about it a lot because I don't want to contribute to the whole way the conversation is being framed. Is so problematic. It's none of your business. It's actually none of your business what a parent is doing with their child, between their child and their doctor. If a child has cancer and their parent is like, we need to get this child care, that's none of my business. if I'm, that's not, so why are we getting involved? We're getting involved because we're in a transphobic society and we want to police the bodies of trans people as a way of, so much of it is about, again, the connection between policing the bodies of women and gender nonconforming people. It's all connected.
None of this is about well-being. Those same states, the same states
Yeah.
that restrict transitioning access and who are now taking away healthcare for trans people, are the same states forcing people who are pregnant, regardless of how baby they are, even
Mm-hmm.
forcing them to give birth, something that can kill them,
It is,
something that will destroy their fucking lives. Like it's such a giant
it's
conspiracy
the
of
height of
control.
it's the height of
Yeah,
misogyny.
truly.
It
Yeah.
it really is the height of misogyny. It's just, it's like, and in control, and the interesting and sad thing about it, and we really, I don't know if we can say this enough, it was about 5 years after the passage of Roe v. Wade that that Christian conservatives were sort of like, okay, abortion is bad, right? For 5 years, they weren't like, Catholics had issues, but like evangelicals in the United States didn't. And then like they realized the abortion becoming a political issue around 1978 in this country, we're like, well, we can't really run on school desegregation anymore for conservatives, right? Because at this point, school prayer had been, this thing, and then like they really wanted to, resegregate the schools, but they, by 1978, they couldn't really run on that. People were like, well, no, this is a problem, but they realized they could use abortion, and so abortion became an issue that they could use to galvanize Christian conservatives ultimately to vote against their own economic interest, right? The history of abortion, if we look at that and then look at the ways in which trans people are used as scapegoats, the conservative, and here in the United States, it is mostly Republicans, not exclusively, but the Republican Party that is passing laws forbidding, gender affirming care for trans people. And those same Republicans have no solutions for inflation, for a minimum wage. They want a union bust. They are about corporate rule. They're about like corporations being completely deregulated and working people being at the whim of those corporations. And since that is not a popular message with the majority of the people who are working class, they use the issues of trans people in sports, or abortion, or critical race theory that's not being taught. They use all of these, what people call culture war issues, to distract from the fact that they're actually not providing anything that will materially change the well-being of working and middle-class people in the United States. And this is the context that we should be viewing all of this culture war stuff in. And so anyone who, I'm a trans person, and so I talk about trans issues, but I try to do it very selectively because I don't want to feed into the narratives that like trans people, despite what I was about to say his name, despite what certain people might say on certain podcasts, according to the Williams Institute, there's probably only it's less than 1% of the population in the United States who identifies as trans. And that's just an estimation, right?
We mean that fucking dickhead who said there were millions, and there's
Yes.
just
Yes.
what a stupid prick. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, I try not to use
We
that
move on.
language to
No, we move
describe
on. Oh,
people.
sorry.
But no, it's fine. You can do whatever you want, honey. I'm not policing anybody's language.
I'm English.
But part of the issue with so much of this thing around puberty blockers, for example, is that we haven't done enough research on trans people because we don't even count trans people in the census, right? We don't know, we don't there's not enough data collection around trans folks. When we look at trans people in sports, there have been legitimately maybe 2 peer-reviewed studies of trans people in sports. So people are speculating, and people are using what a cis male adult physical capacities are, and to make that a trans woman's physical capacity. And it's like, we haven't done enough research, and there hasn't been an investment in research on so many levels and data collection on so many levels when it comes to trans people. There are great new studies now that have come out that have looked at trans children over the past, decade or so, and noted that less than 1% of them detransition, that more of them are happy and healthy, having, living their authentic lives. We do actually have that research. But when people who are talking about, trans people in sports or puberty blockers, they don't actually have any information. And again, I want to emphasize that puberty blockers have existed for 40 years and were initially used for children with precocious puberties who went into puberty too early. And once the young people stopped those puberty blockers, they would just go through puberty. This is what for 4 decades we understand about puberty blockers. And people sorry, on a rant. There are people who are citing this CDC study from earlier this year talking about particularly Lupron, which is only one medication used to block puberty. But that research was done because it's also used in adult men who have prostate cancer. You cannot take a study that looks at adult men with prostate cancer and those side effects and compare those to children. You can't use that research. It's just not. It's not in good faith. And it's just a mess right now. And it's frustrating for me seeing so many people who don't know what they're talking about having these conversations. Don't even think about inviting a trans person who might be an expert on to talk about this, and there are trans people who know more than I do about this, but like no trans people in sight. Everybody's talking about trans folks, no trans people around. It's very frustrating.
But it's
anyway.
also like, it's a classic. No, I fucking love that you just said that. I loved all that you said there. And I was like, I'm going to listen back to this episode. I'm going to write down notes because you just said that more succinctly than I ever could. Thank you. Thank you for saying that. And I know that it's something that you don't talk about all the time. And I understand why, because you don't want to even fan that flame that continues to use trans issues as a distraction from climate change, the wealth gap, the wealth transfer of the last 3 years, Medicaid, the fact that they're trying to scrap it in the fucking Supreme Court, like all these different things. We see it as well with immigrants, right? Like trans people are just another form of scapegoat and straw man argument, like the way that, when the government doesn't help poor people in this country, they just go, well, it's because of the immigrants coming in, who make up like 0.0000 something of our population. Blame them. It's always divert away from them. And this is why, I've become less and less and less. I'm trying to be less and less and less divisive in my language, because I'm desperate for us to come together on our vast similarities rather than differences. And I don't want an us versus them thing, because that was created by governments and by institutions that rely upon us turning the other way and looking at each other rather than looking at them.
And now a media system, a social media system, a mainstream media, just media in general, that it has us in our echo chambers, siloed, receiving completely different messages, and some of them have to do with actual facts, and a lot of them don't. So it's like, how do we come together? But what has been so beautiful about my life is meeting people who are, conservative and vote Republican and voted for Trump, who are lovely people, who see me in my humanity and my womanhood, and I see them in their humanity, and they voted for Trump for, they're not racist, they're not, it's usually often a single issue. Sometimes it is abortion. Sometimes it's like about, support of the police. Sometimes it's about what the Democratic Party may represent, that is, that they just can't get behind. And so people are complicated, right?
A lot of people did it for jobs, because he said he was going to bring back ginormous industries that impact the working class, that liberals didn't give a fucking shit about, like privileged liberals.
He said that, but obviously he didn't govern that way.
No.
But many people who voted for Obama and then voted for Trump did it because the hope of jobs coming back, particularly in the Midwest, where the manufacturing industry has been decimated. A lot of those people voted for Trump in the hopes that they would have jobs back. And unfortunately, he obviously didn't govern that way. And so people are complicated. And so it's important not to paint people with a broad brush, just sort of get to know people as people. And sometimes they may be able to let go of their biases, and other times they might not be able to. What has been so beautiful about being me throughout my life, and being, through various, incarnations of myself, is that for the most part, people who aren't going to be down with me see it right away, right? Like there's something about me that has repelled people who are going to probably have a problem. I've been a gender non-conforming and then trans person my whole life. I've been an artist, so I attract certain people and repel others. So I've been very lucky that the people in my life have been really awesome, incredible people. And I I just have to believe in the humanity of everyone, and that everyone has a story and everyone is in pain. And so even though
Everyone's a product of their environment.
yeah, and even though our political systems are problematic and our politicians are problematic, I think that like human beings and voters, like I want to look at their humanity, see their humanity, and highlight that and find ways. I'm going to keep putting this out there. I had my team reach out to Joe Rogan, and to the Breakfast Club, because I wanted to go on both shows and just talk and be me. Part of it is like, yes, I talk about trans stuff sometimes, but like a lot of where I'm at in my career, I've been talking about trans stuff like since I've been, in the public eye, but I love just going out and getting to be myself, because yes, I'm trans and I can talk about trans issues, but I can talk about a lot of things. I'm well versed in many topics, and I just want to go out and be human and be a human being. And I think that the truth of my life is that most people who've experienced me, in various work situations, in various workspaces, I rarely in my personal life talk about being trans. I'm just me and I just do me. And people have gotten into my humanity. And that is really this is the best way to kind of be able to proceed in the world. And so that's what I want. I would love to sit down with Joe Rogan and have a conversation, not attacking him, not, but just having he's had really wonderful conversation. The Cornel West conversation, I'm obsessed. His conversation with Dr. Cornel West was so beautiful and so amazing. And I would just love to sit down with him as a human being and just talk. I think that's important. I think that like those
Yeah,
moments.
I don't think there's an inherently evil person in there or amongst that show. I think what there is massively, and you might disagree with me here, is is a a rejection of the cultish, uh, a slightly oppressive and like similar to the right wing kind of approach of some people in the liberal space, especially those people on social media. I think it's very obvious that Joe Rogan is fundamentally a liberal, like the way that he talks in some ways. Like there are some things he say that echo the right wing, but ultimately, fundamentally, he refers to himself openly as a liberal, right? And
He supported Bernie Sanders. So
exactly. So, but my point being that I think that and I've said this a billion times in this podcast, so I'm going to be very quick, but we on the left need to also do a better job at not demonizing other people immediately, not immediately assuming that they are beyond redemption, beyond change. Otherwise, what is the point of our activism? I think it's beautiful that you want to go on Joe Rogan's podcast. I'm still unsure about how I feel for it.
I
For
don't
me,
know how
not
it'll
for any,
go. I don't know
yeah,
how it'll
not for
go,
any,
but I
yeah,
want to go in
exactly.
with love. I want to approach it with love and empathy.
I
And
can't think of
that's
anyone more equipped than you, honestly.
and yeah, and I think too, it's our media. I mean, I think that like, the moment when on Joe's podcast, his guest asserted that there were millions and millions of children, on hormone blockers, and
He
having,
fact checked.
tops, and his
Yeah.
producer Jamie was like, well, no, that's actually not true. That there's just a lot of misinformation out there, and like who has time, I mean, he, especially as many shows as he does, when I get to do a podcast or when I do an episode of If We're Being Honest, I have the time to do a lot of research on the people that I'm interviewing, and I try to do deep dives so I really know, and he doesn't have time to do all that, so, and I get it. But there's just so much misinformation out there, and having interruptions in that, I think is really important, because it does, if you are a person who might not have a depth of knowledge about trans people or don't personally know trans people, oh, it is scary to like, puberty blockers on young people. That sounds scary, right? And I think that's why they focused on young people. The trans issue, bathrooms didn't work, but I think when we start talking about children changing their bodies, it can be really scary, right, for people.
Unless
And
they're
so I
having a baby.
Exactly. So it's been a great way for conservative folks to, make trans people seem so radical and so, all these things. But I think it's like it just comes from an uninformed place. And hopefully people, as they get more information, will, I think at the end of the day, whatever information you have or don't have, again, I don't think it's any of your business. And I think like when we get into the minutia of like, what's reversible, what's not reversible, it's like that shouldn't even be the conversation. The conversation should be, it is actually none of your business what somebody else is doing with their body. And what a parent is doing in consultation with a doctor for the mental and physical health of their child is actually none of your business. And this is not something that should be a public debate. It just shouldn't. I think reproductive rights and abortion should not be a public debate. It's none of my business whether someone has an abortion or not. It really
It
is.
goes against
I
medical
support reproductive
privacy.
rights. I
Yeah.
support reproductive rights and a right to choose and bodily autonomy. Absolutely. And I'm on the record and I've done their receipts of me supporting that. But I think at the end of the day, it's nobody's business, like what someone's doing. When people get into debates about how many weeks, and it's none of my business. It's none of your business. Let a doctor decide. Let this be a decision between a doctor and the patient, or a parent, and it's none of your business.
100. No. It's 100%. Please put that on a sweater so I can buy it. Just it's none of your business. I feel a new hashtag coming on, Laverne. But I fully agree. So can I ask you something?
Oh, yeah.
Because there's a varying answers on this, like amongst people who exist within a space of advocacy, or even people who aren't advocates themselves and they wish not to have to be advocates. And we've really seen like a kind of rise of this in the last 7 years. A lot of marginalized people say, well, I don't want to fucking reach out to the other side. I don't want to do the labor of educating them. They should go and fucking educate themselves. Now, I respect that. I understand people are fucking exhausted. And as you say, it's no one else's business anyway. But if we're just going to be practical, I don't see a way out of this other than exposing them to us and our humanity and trying to reach the common ground. So I personally am someone who I also live a privileged life where I have more safety and more protection and more access and more, ability to take the time out to exist within advocacy. But I personally am going to take it upon myself to try to reach across. And I'm not going to feel like a bad person for consorting with the quote unquote enemy when I'm trying to bridge the gap. And I sense from what you're saying about the spaces that you feel comfortable going into to try to, humanize and remind people that trans people are just whole, regular humans with problems that are fantastical and problems that are mundane and existences that are very, very normal and traditional in most ways. All my trans friends have all the same problems as my non-trans friends in certain areas. And then there are extra levels that aren't created by them, that are created from an outside society that they then have to deal with.
I thank you so much for asking that. I think when I hear particularly from Black folks in the United States who will refuse to work with the Republican Party, and it's the racism for them, right? And I think that I get that and I understand that, but I think painting the entire Republican Party as racist, we can talk about policies, we can talk about impact, and and we can talk about history and the political realities are what they are, and many of those policies are racist. The history of the United States is racist and white supremacist, right? So I think
history of Democrats is racist.
History, exactly, all of that. America is a racist country, just historically, for so many reasons, and we have not been able to reckon with that. I think like starting there is not, for me, I consider myself very patriotic. I love being American. I really do. And I travel internationally and it's wonderful, but I love being American. And there are things about me that are unapologetically and perhaps problematically American. I love this country for so many reasons. I think my story and evolution is only possible in this country. So I'm a very patriotic place that this country was founded in racism and misogyny and all these things. And it doesn't mean I don't love my country. It's just like, that's the truth. So when I hear Black folks say, I don't want to work with this party because of that, I get that. But then I'm like, okay, I think it's about, so that we're not consorting with and raising up or platforming, if you will, more racism, more transphobia. I think ideally we come together on our shared humanity and solutions. I think coming together around, we hate the same people, it's not real belonging. Brene Brown would tell us it's not real belonging. But if we can come together around solutions, right? If we can say, not, the Democratic Party is, because I have problems with the Democratic Party, and like a lot of Republicans will too, but that is not what we have problems with, I don't think is the way we come together, but like, how do we come together with solutions? And how do we come together in our shared humanity? I see you as a human being, and hopefully you see me as a human being. And ultimately, human beings want the same things. So let's come together around that shared humanity and around solutions. I think so much of part of what the media has done, and I blame the media, politicians as well, but politicians urged on by media. When I say media, it means social media as well as like, media, is we should hate these people. We should own this group of people. These people, we need to be against this instead of what are we for? And I think when we can, get offline, get off social media and interact with people as human beings, then we can do that. I really believe we can do that. And there's like this whole like gender ideology thing, but it's just like, okay, I'm a person. I'm not an ideology. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not. And I literally saw, I was on Twitter, that horrible place, just yesterday.
R.I.P.
And someone tweeted, with my name in it, like, the whole trans thing wasn't a thing until Laverne Cox is on Orange is the New Black. And then all these trans people like came around. So people were like asserting that trans people didn't exist before. I mean, it's insane.
Congratulations on being a trailblazer as the first ever trans person. I had no idea. What an honor.
That's obviously incorrect. And so, I mean, trans people, there's people don't know history, right? And there's again, education. It's just, a part of we really need better schools. But part of the reason that we don't have better schools is so an uneducated electorate is an electorate that can be controlled more effectively. But trans people have existed since the beginning of time, obviously. My goodness. And so a lot of this is about education. A lot of it's about misinformation, miseducation. And I think if I've said this a zillion times, but I think everybody within the sound of my voice, if we can let go of narratives about groups of people and narratives about ideology and understand, and I think like for me, I try to hold systems and mindsets accountable, right? For me, I'm critical of ideologies and critical of institutions, but I love individuals. I love human beings, even if they might not love me, even if they don't see my humanity. And that is, I think, the beautiful thing about the sort of, Christian tradition, particularly epitomized in the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s, that there's this radical love that we'll have. Black folks, when we were, enslaved and, second-class citizens through Jim Crow, the best of us didn't say, oh, we want to enslave white people. The best of us said, we want equality for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to oppress you. We just want equality for everyone. And we want to love our enemies, even if they don't see our humanity. And I think that that ethic, I think, is something that when I think about what gets me through now and what I need, even with like 22 years of therapy and various processes and whatnot to build resilience, that the spirituality of that of my ancestors who are Black and transcestors who are trans and people of color is that spirituality and that love and that connection to something that is bigger than me, that I'm trying to allow an energy that is bigger than me to move through me in the world. That is something that is so beautiful about being Black. And I think what's so beautiful about you, I remember on my show, if we're being honest, you talked about living with multiple people, and that's part of your tradition, that there's communal living, and there's so many lessons that we can learn from. That's why diversity is so awesome. That's why like having different people that we can learn from is so awesome, because there's so many things that in ways that people live that can inform and enrich our lives.
100%. I mean, Jesus Christ, I know that from learning more about and having more and more friends within the trans community, specifically now, like knowing more and more people in ballroom,
Mm-hmm.
the concept of the chosen family is something I talk about a lot, where I'm like, there are so many people who, even if they aren't queer or if they aren't, different from their family in a way that makes them technically marginalized, there are so many people who grow up, and whether it's due to an alcoholic parent or mental illness in the family or just like a difference in the way people choose to treat each other and hold each other's boundaries. A lot of people I know who aren't marginalized at all do not get on at all with their families, and it creates this feeling of such intense loneliness. And if we could learn something from the ballroom community in particular, but the trans community, who were forced to have to learn how to do this because they were otherized and ostracized, but they found family and called it family in people that they had no shared DNA with, they had a shared experience with, and a shared desire for love and for unconditional love, for support, and for home. You know, so many people could fucking benefit from that. And the reason I have so many roommates at my age is because they are my fucking family. Like, I don't have a strong relationship with my own family, and I've got a zillion cousins, I think. But these people got me and understood me and respected my boundaries in a way that I makes me feel so safe and so at home. So it's just one example of ways in which we could all learn from the trans community. Look at what trans women have done for feminist ideology, for breaking the gender barriers, for rejecting misogyny, for rejecting patriarchy, and like leading our way. And I'm not just talking about trans people. We learn a lot from immigrants, and we learn a lot from all kinds of different people. It would be so wonderful. I hope you do get to go on Joe Rogan. I hope you do become fucking president of the United fucking States. Honestly, you and your patriotic ass. I wonder if, and I can cut this out, but like, I wonder if it would be good for you and me to work with some, I don't know, members of government or something, or maybe not the members of government considering what they're doing, but to work with some experts to create an actual finite statistical list of the biggest problems that impact the most people in America, and create like a leaderboard of like top 10 issues or top 20 issues that are actually impacting each and every household the most. We're going to find the cost of living crisis up there. We're even going to find fucking gas prices, climate, all kinds of different healthcare.
That wages haven't kept up over the 40 years with inflation, right?
Exactly.
So well, income inequality, I think, is huge. There are, what I do believe, for left-leaning people, is that we don't have a federalist society, right? That, like, thinking about how in the early 1980s that Republicans and conservatives were like, we need, in the face of the Warren Court and abortion becoming the law of the land, they're like, we need to capture the courts. And really, the conservative majority that we have on the Supreme Court now is over 40 years in the making. It's the Federalist Society has been relentless about churning out conservative judges, having a litmus test for them, and evolving to have this 6-3 majority on the Supreme Court that has overturned Roe v. Wade. There is no such equivalent on the left around judges, around justice for everybody. And so I think, there's just so much work that needs to be done. And that's not my sphere of, I'm not an organizer, and I don't think I am anyway. I'm not really. I'm an actor, and I'm, I talk and I tell stories. But I do think that there need to be better organizations on the left that are not corporate driven. And I think that, because I think the heart of most of the issues in the United States are a corporate capture of everything. And we say this in a context on your podcast, it's going to be on a corporate platform. And I work for many multinational corporations. And so it's that contradiction is what, we sort of exist in. And I do believe every time I say something like that, I get like really nervous about like sort of being shadow banned and being like, you're calling out corporate corruption. I feel like it's like the thing that you really aren't allowed to do. But that corporate corruption is part of what it's keeping us divided as well. And so no, I think that list, yes. And I think that list needs to happen, but then we would need to get money out of politics so our politicians could actually do something about it. The reason why, and I think most of our politicians understand what the issues are. It's just that they're being bribed by corporations and special interests to do their bidding and not the bidding of everyday people and working people. So the system the fact that we have legalized bribery in the United States is what keeps us from having a higher minimum wage. $15 is not even enough anymore. We should be at like at least $25 an hour, right? That fact that we don't have that is because of corporate capture. The fact that like even, I mean, what's deep is this marriage, as we record this, there is going to be a vote on marriage equality. And this, we got like 12 Republican senators for marriage equality, but we don't have Roe v. Wade codified. We don't have a $15 minimum wage. We don't have a PRO Act. We don't have an Equality Act. So it's like, well,
oh no, absolutely. But I don't mean that this list is for the fucking government. I mean, if I went on Joe Rogan, I'd want to bring a giant fuck off laminated chart of like the things that are actually impacting each one. So we can look at how the media or certain politicians choose to like drag like trans sports, which is 40th on the fucking list or 100th on the list of like
probably
problems that the everyday exactly like and like go and make that the big issue.
Yeah.
And they don't talk about like the problems within the foster care system and how many kids are going to end up in that. We don't really know the numbers of abortions. Like I think it's somewhere between like 700,000 and a million. It depends, like it oscillates, you know, and I think it's going to change more and more due to the, well, partially down to the laws, but then partially due to how inaffordable it is to fucking live or raise children nowadays, right? So that number keeps increasing. Hundreds of thousands of children now going to be forced into a system that is already fucking broken. We don't talk about this, but we need hard facts. We need two people who aren't screaming at each other, who are not using, and like a scarecrow, straw man, free zone, where we can just look. I think there's a specific journalist, maybe Katie Hill, I'm not sure, who brings like just a fucking laminated fact sheet. We need one of those for the issues that are actually impacting every single American. So they can see that we are wasting time fighting over shit that we all need together. Number one, I think, might be healthcare. Number fucking one. We shouldn't be talking about all this other shit before we talk about the environment and healthcare and mental health care. Like,
but there's so many interests. I mean, pharmaceutical industry and insurance industry that don't want us talking about that, right? And then like a lot of misinformation around what it mean to have, you know, a single payer healthcare plan in the United States, right? Like, it's a lot of misinformation. So there needs to be an education program attached to that. Speaking of which, another thing I just need to say around gender affirming care for trans youth, it's really expensive. It is really, it's prohibitive for many working class people to have access. Insurance doesn't cover most gender affirming care for trans youth, which is actually a violation of the Affordable Care Act. We'll see what the courts say about all that, but it's really expensive. So it's like just the fact that puberty blockers are so expensive, it's prohibitive. Like it just reduces access for so many people. Again, something people aren't talking about. And like the reality of that is just like,
it makes no sense, and it's designed to make no sense. Like that is the thing that is the most important, is we can't just say, oh, it's just a bunch of hapless politicians being lobbied and forced by corporations. It's also chaos. This is organized chaos, right? If we don't know where to look, if everything's on fire, we don't know where to even fucking start. That is by design. They know exactly where to start, especially those with you know, who are succeeding and taking the most human rights away. Like they know exactly what's going on. And that is a carefully designed, like plotted 40-year, as you said, planned out attack.
And when abortion or marriage equality become the things that we focus on with the Supreme Court or affirmative action, we don't focus on the deregulation that the Supreme Court is really, that is the real project of the Federalist Society.
What do you mean?
That every industry is deregulated. So there's, I forget the specific, I'm not a lawyer. There's a specific idea around deferring to the experts on various issues like climate change, for example, right? So the Supreme Court, there's many cases that have been before the Supreme Court that deal with regulating the environment, that deal with regulating the pharmaceutical industry, regulating various industries. And the Supreme Court always sides with corporations and deregulation. Those things don't make the news. That's the real project of the Federalist Society, according to many experts on the left, that we should be paying more attention to, the deregulation that is happening across industries, right? Corporations basically want and regulations are just laws. They want fewer laws so they can do more, that might destroy the environment, that might make drugs less safe, but to get things out to the market so they can make more money, because the fiduciary responsibility of corporations is to increase profits for their shareholders. That is the law. So that law should be changed. And that these are things I think we have to have a bigger critical lens around what's really happening. And most of that is about corporate corruption, corporate capture of every aspect of our society.
100%.
And then in the face of that, I've done many corporate, speaking engagements when they would invite me to talk about diversity and inclusion. And I always try to take those opportunities to invite employees of corporations. I think the employees of Disney are a really great model, that they were like, wait a minute, this don't say gay bill thing in Florida, this is the problem. And we don't want our corporation to support politicians who would pass these kinds of laws. So then employees at these really powerful corporations can, with varying degrees of success, speak up. Sometimes they have more of a voice than other corporations. But how do we, if we understand that corporations are ruling everything, how do we then begin to hold corporations accountable? For particularly the politicians they support and the politicians they're giving money to. Opensecrets.org, you can see what politicians are getting money from whom, and that'll explain mostly how they're voting.
Boom. Fucking hell. This was not the chat I thought we were going to have.
Girl, I'm sorry.
No,
I
don't be
talk
sorry
about
at
this
all.
stuff.
I feel like
I don't
my
go into the
skin
political
has
realm
been
a
cleared.
lot.
No, I love it. I feel like my skin is cleared. I feel like my hair has grown thicker in the last hour. Thank you so much. I feel like I've just had a shot of coffee up my ass. Like this is just,
coffee
I love you.
But part of our mental health, though, I think for me, part of my mental health is understanding the way that the system works and having an understanding of that, a critical relationship to that. And then what is my 50% in it? What can I control? This is crucial to me. And that I'm not, that the mental health conversation is not just about mental health. For me, it's about acknowledging that I've internalized racism, I've internalized white supremacy and transphobia and classism and all sorts of things that are systemic. That understanding that, and then understanding that I can resist that I'm the master of my fate, the captain of my soul, that I am in control of my perception and my behavior. So those are the things I can control. So having both those things play in my life is really important. It's part of my mental health journey, not being in denial about what is going on in the world, but having a perspective around it that will make me not feel hopeless and helpless. A perspective around it that even as rights are being taken away, having a historical perspective that oh, my ancestors were enslaved. My ancestors were, they had to drink out of Black only water fountains, and they found a way to love each other and to build this culture and traditions that got them through. And so that is part of mental health for me, is having an astute understanding of what's happening politically, so that and historically in relationship to politics, so that I don't descend into hopelessness, because it's scary right now. If you don't have that perspective and have a connection to something bigger than you, it's very easy to become nihilistic and hopeless in the face of all of this.
You see the light, and Laverne, you are the light. Honestly, I really don't mean that lightly. I haven't personally heard you talk like this very often, and I totally understand why. And I think you've spoken beautifully about the importance of also sometimes being allowed to switch off and step back and enjoy some of the more frivolous and human things.
And it's contextual as well. I've learned that every context isn't appropriate, and every person isn't the right person to have this conversation with. So, and it just, I don't know. I just don't want to be screaming into a void, the same thing over and over again. Because I was just exhausted. I mean, I'm in 2020, I was like, oh my God, I'm tired. In 2020, I'm exhausted. And I needed to pull back, I needed to pull back from activism, because it was killing my spirit. It was really it's killing my spirit. And so I have, but it doesn't mean that I don't know what's going on. It doesn't mean that
Yeah,
I
and
don't have a
also
critical
information.
awareness. Yeah.
Yes, information and being able to pass that information on to others is
Yeah.
also one of the most vital parts of activism. Most fear, I'm sorry, most bigotry comes from a place of fear. It comes from a lack of knowledge. The best way to combat that fear is with knowledge, is with explanation, is with showing people what it is that they're actually afraid of so that they can,
Yeah.
it's like a kind of aversion therapy almost, putting them
Yeah.
in front of immigrants, putting them in front of trans people, putting them in front of gay people, putting them in front of, people who would like to have an abortion for their own kind of sanity and safety. We just need to stop letting the fucking media and social media divide us. And I so appreciate what a progressive you are. I so appreciate what a progressive you are. It is not popular still to be a
Oh God,
progressive.
no.
No, it
No.
isn't, because we consider it some sort of a disloyalty. I so love you for not considering it disloyalty. It is the, in my opinion, ultimate loyalty to see hope, to see the light, to follow that light and try to spread it on as many people who are different from you as
Yeah.
possible.
And really, like, in what are we doing for the least of these? Like, as much privilege as both you and I enjoy, there are people who are struggling, and there
Mm-hmm.
are policies and things in place that are not doing anything for them, and structures that are in place that are not doing anything for them. And so it's like, we have to at least be able to tell the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Part of there's a YouTuber and a political commentator who I disagree on with most things. I'll name him the funky academic. I disagree with him on so many things, but I love that he says, and I'll cite him. He says that the job of a politician, and perhaps even the job of some activists, is either to change policy or to define the fight. If we are unable to, and I think this is just brilliant. If we are unable to change policy because of a filibuster or because of, some sort of obstruction or corporate capture or whatever, we need to be able to define what the fight is.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say fight, I think the fight against structures, the fight against corporate capture, the fight against ourselves. And sometimes that fight is to stop fighting each other and to love each other and understand that there are bigger systems in place. So I think being able to speak the truth is, Bell Hooks talks about this, Cornel West talks about this, that we have to have the courage to tell the truth. And it is scary. It is really, really scary to tell the truth, because particularly when it's the truth about corporate capture and money being the root of all of this, it is a very scary thing because, there are lots of things in place that, don't want folks to think about that or focus on that. That's why we have all the things,
Distraction.
use all the distractions, all the look
Mm-hmm.
over there, is to quote Jada Essence Hall from RuPaul's Drag Race. I
I'm
just got a
so
Drag Race reference in.
I am so grateful for all your references. I'm grateful for your journey. I'm grateful for how you share your journey. I'm grateful for how uplifting you are in spite of a lot of the things that you have seen. I'm grateful for how you acknowledge the beauty in your life and the beautiful people around you throughout even the hardest times.
Mhm.
You have a really fabulous perspective, and one that I was so desperate to get onto this podcast because it's what we need right now. We need hope, we need determination, we need organization, we need knowledge, and and we need tolerance, and we need the tolerance towards others that we expect for ourselves. We
Yeah,
mustn't turn into them. We mustn't let the hate eat our hearts as well.
yeah.
Before you go, can I just ask you, what do you
Yes.
weigh?
Oh, yeah. I weigh my capacity for passion and love, um, through every stage and phase of my life, through every hardship. I weigh that I understand that it's all about love, that it is all about, when I haven't been able to love myself, that it is the love of art, the love of acting, the passion for that has gotten me through, the love of music, the love of Leontine Price singing a Peony Sumo High C. That is love and that is beauty, that has gotten me through, that is all about love. And when I can allow, get out of my own way and allow that love to permeate every aspect of my life, that it's all going to be okay.
I love that. I love you. Come back anytime. I support you always, mate.
Likewise. Thank you. I love this. Whoop, girl, I didn't know we were going to be going here.
Same.
Um,
I loved it. I love you.
Me
You're
too. I love you
fantastic.
too, Jameela. Thank you so much for this. Thank you so much for your movement and your voice and your talent. You're such a wonderful actress too. I know that you do all these other things, but you're just was such a wonderful talent as an
Likewise, mate.
actor.
I'm grateful
Um,
that we're here at the same time. I'm grateful that we met, and thank you for having me on your show. If we're being
yes,
honest, like I love that show. I want everyone to go and watch it. I want everyone to see and listen to everything that you're doing. So if you're not already
thank you.
following Laverne, what the fuck are you really doing with your life? Change it now. Bye, love.
Bye, darling.